Alrighty, so go ahead and get started with the third lab. Okay, so taking a look at the lab 3 directions this week. Okay, so looking over this one, this is going to be for the second half of chapter 2. So kind of the main focus now is going to be dealing with user input. So first we're going to take a look at using the scanner class. So I'll do it for this one lab. We can see how to do it with the scanner class. This will also show up again a little bit in the first exam and the final exam. Just kind of note now, just make sure that you still remember this class. You will still use it again a couple of times later in the semester. But after this week, the main thing I'll be focusing on is going to be the other type of user input that we cover, which is the very end of this chapter, which is dialog boxes. That'll be essentially what we're going to be using for the remainder of the semester. But for this particular one, we'll go ahead and do it with the scanner class just to kind of start off a little bit easier. The lab this week, the title for it is going to be compound interest. So you might be able to guess what this lab is about from the title alone. For the purpose of this one, it's going to be to practice writing programs that can accept user input using the scanner class. So the major concepts covered are going to be that scanner class. And then also, because this is dealing with compound interest, there's going to be slightly more complex math operations to do. So a little bit more than just multiplication this time around. So for the task, you'll go ahead and create a project called compound interest and then your first and last name, or lab 3 and your first and last name. Remember to include comments summarizing the program. Additionally, if you do this with REPL.it, you could be doing it with a REPL instead of just a project. So keep that in mind. Then going through each one of the steps for this week's lab. So first, you'll go ahead and import the scanner class, and you'll declare a variable for the scanner class. So if you already had a chance to watch the video that goes over that scanner class, the one about reading keyboard input, then you'll kind of understand what that means already. So this particular variable is going to be used to read from the keyboard. Once you've done that, for steps 2 and 3, this is just going to be a few more variable declarations. And then steps 4 and on is going to be everything that comes after your variable declarations. So for step 2, you'll go ahead and declare 3 variables of type double. So this will again just be kind of like what you did in the previous lab where you had to declare 3 variables of type double. So it's very similar in that sense. These are going to be used to hold the user's input of 3 different numbers. So to give you a bit of a hint about what you should name these 3 variables, the different requests that you're going to be making to the user will include the initial balance, the interest rate, and the number of years later in this program. And then whenever you first declare these, you can go ahead and initialize them all to 0. And then for step 3, you'll go ahead and declare a 4th variable, again of type double. And this is going to be used to hold the final amount after some calculations are performed using those other 3 double variables. And again, just like in step 2, you can go ahead and initialize this variable to 0. Okay, so essentially steps 1 through 3, it's all just variable declarations and then 1 import statement. So that kind of covers, what would that be? About 6 lines of code between those 3 steps. And then in step 4, this is where we're going to start actually making our requests for user input. So first you'll go ahead and print a request to the user asking for the principal balance. You'll go ahead and store the user's input into the first of the 3 variables you declared in step 2. In step 5, you'll go ahead and print a request to the user asking for the interest rate as a percentage. So because you're going to initially ask for the interest rate as a percentage, when you actually use that in your calculations, you actually want it to be treated as a decimal amount. So essentially what that means is that you're going to have to divide it by 100. So I mentioned that here in this step. You'll go ahead and divide the user's input by 100 and then store that result into the second of the 3 variables you declared in step 2. And then step 6, you'll go ahead and print a request to the user asking for the number of years, and you'll go ahead and store that input into the third of the 3 variables you declared in step 2. So essentially steps 4, 5, and 6, this is just going to be 3 different requests to the user for each one of the 3 different numbers that will be stored into each of the 3 variables from step 2. Okay, so nothing I'd say nothing too fancy about that. If you've, again, seen the video for reading keyboard input, then being able to handle steps 4 through 6 is pretty straightforward based on that. Okay. And then we'll get into step 7. So this is where things will get a little bit more interesting, we'll say. So for this one, you're going to go ahead and use the following equation to calculate the final amount. So this is just standard compound interest equation. So you can see right here, it's going to be this A, which is your final amount. That's going to be equal to P, the principal balance, times 1 plus R, which is the interest rate. And then that 1 plus R, that part is going to be raised to the power of T, which is the number of elapsed years. So you can see how each one of the 3 different numbers that you had to get from steps 4 through 6, each one of those is going to be incorporated into this equation. So you can see you've got, your principal balance that you got from step 4 right here. You've got your interest rate, R, which you get from step 5, and then the T, the number of years that you get from step 6. Okay. So one thing to note is because of the fact that you need to be doing this power right here, you're going to need to use that POW method that you have from the math class in this calculation. And then the result of this equation is going to be stored in the double variable that was declared in step 3. So this A right here, that corresponds to the variable that you declare right here. And then a couple of notes that I included with this one, some common errors that I've noticed from the last couple of times that I've used this lab. 2 common errors that you should try to make sure that you avoid. One, make sure that the interest rate was actually divided by 100 in order to convert it from a percentage to a decimal in step 5. So pretty frequently I'll see people that have very large numbers for their final amount. And the reason for that is that they forget to divide that interest rate by 100. And then the other thing is to make sure that you're performing the math operations for this equation in the proper order. So you'll notice that there's a particular arrangement or particular order that you need to do things in. So in this case, this 1 plus R, that's in parentheses, so that's going to be the very first thing you need to do. You'll then raise that to this power of T, that's the second thing you need to do, and then you're going to multiply it by that principal balance, so that's the third thing that you'll need to do. Right? So you want to make sure that you're doing things in that exact order. Okay. And then finally, in step 8, you'll go ahead and print a message to the user indicating the final amount. For this one, you can go ahead and refer to the following for an example of the expected program flow with the sequence of user inputs and the final output. So right here, just kind of stepping through this example right now, essentially you'd imagine that you've written out a print statement that just says, please specify the initial balance, and then it will, the program will kind of wait right here for the user to enter some amount. So you can go ahead and enter something like 100. And then when you push enter, then it will go ahead and move to the next line. Say, please specify the interest rate. In this case, I went ahead and included this little note to indicate that this is as a percentage. So then I put this 3 right here. So that's going to be treated as 3% when I type it in. But then when we actually get to the equation, so as soon as I go to store this into the variable for it, I'm going to go ahead and divide it by 100 first. So it's going to be changed to something like 0.03. Then I'll push enter, move to the next line. It'll say, please specify the number of elapsed years. I'll go ahead and do something like 5. And then when I push enter here, then it's going to go ahead and do the calculation. So everything in step 7. And then it will go ahead and print out that message at the end indicating the final amount. So in this case, the final amount with interest is going to be roughly $115 and about 93 cents. So right now, one thing I'll note is that you're going to see these rather weird, very precise answers for your math calculations. Obviously, when you're dealing with money, you're probably never going to see it quite this exact. Eventually, a couple weeks from now, we're going to see a way to format our output to kind of clean this up a little bit more. But for right now, you don't have to worry too much about that. You can get an answer like this, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, and then going through the criteria for this week's lab. So the comments summarizing the program are going to be worth 5 points. So this time around, I'm not going to be going into REPL to kind of like work through the comments and everything that you'll need to include. Instead, starting from this week on, I'll be leaving it to you guys to start putting together your own comments for the labs. My recommendation would be to essentially just take each one of these steps, maybe kind of break that down into just a few keywords, and then use that as your comments to indicate, which lines of code correspond to which step. It's a pretty easy, clear way to approach it. The correct variable declarations, including the variable for the scanner class, are going to be worth 15 points. That should also include the import statement. So that import statement plus everything that's handled in the first 3 steps, all of that's going to be 15 points. Correctly requesting the user input and then storing each value into the proper variable is going to be worth 10 points per request. So that's most of what's going on in steps 4 through 6. The one other thing to include is the division operator for the interest rate. So that operation where you have to divide by 100, that's going to be another 5 points. So including that, everything for steps 4 through 6 is going to be 35 points. Correctly calculating the final amount is going to be worth another 35 points. So that's just talking about step 7. And then properly printing the contents to the console is going to be worth 10 points. So that's going to be step 8. Okay, so at this point, this is going to cover everything that I'll be doing this week for the lab. I think in addition to this, I will go ahead and put together the code for this real quick on REPL, just make sure I have it over there as well. And then I'll try to see if I have a way to be able to run it on REPL without the code being visible on the screen. So it'll probably take me a quick moment to make sure that I know how to make it do that. I have a pretty good idea to make it do that. But I'll go ahead and do something like that really quick, just to be able to demonstrate what this program looks like when you're actually running it in real time. But other than that, does anybody have any questions about the directions for this week's lab?
Yeah, I have a question. So where you mentioned the videos for the keyboard and all that, where can we find those? I looked trying to find the the videos to watch it. I couldn't find the link. Can you just tell us? It's under course contents or where?
Yeah, so if you go to course content on the 1336 part, you'll see the chapter 2 materials right there. If you click on the thing that says chapter 2 playlist, it'll probably give you like a redirect, like ask you if you want to redirect. So you just click on the YouTube link that it gives you. That'll redirect you to the YouTube playlist. And then the reading keyboard input is the, I believe, second to last video on that playlist.
So we're going to the lab actually, not to the other one, right? To the lab, under lab.
It's the 1336 part. So the lecture part has the actual course content, and then the lab just has the lab assignments.
Oh, got you. Okay.
Yeah. Hopefully soon it will not be split like this anymore, so there won't be this much confusion over the layout on Blackboard.
So course contents, and it's under chapter 2.
Yes.
Oh, I see this link to YouTube, the Java fundamental, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And we're using REPL again for this week too, right?
Yeah, you can still use REPL for this one. One thing I'll note, I did for the output on this one include what the output would look like if you run it on NetBeans. So if you guys want to start making the transition to start getting NetBeans set up and being able to use that on your computer, I would say now is probably a good time to start working through that. And then I guess within the next week or two, we'll start to fully transition to using an IDE.
Okay, and then you're going just to use the REPL to demonstrate right now for a little bit?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and use REPL to demonstrate this one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, and then I think since we made a mention about the videos for this week, one other thing I'll note, if you guys want to be able to double check about this POW method, that one's brought up in the arithmetic operations video. So it was one of the videos I mentioned from last week that you wanted to watch. So if you want to be able to give that video another watch to be able to see this little part, it's kind of close to the end of that video, just to make sure that you understood how to use this method. I would certainly recommend doing that. Okay. Were there any other questions about this week's lab?
The user numbers, like where we're asking the user to put in their numbers, do we put in the numbers, or like I don't get where we get the actual values?
Yeah, so whenever you're running the program, the way that it works is because you're using the scanner class, the way that the scanner class works, whenever you call one of its methods, it will actually force the program to essentially stop doing anything, and it will just kind of wait for you to give it some kind of input. So the way that it works is you'll type a number, you'll push the enter key, And then when you push the enter key, that's the way that the program knows, okay, I've been given some input and we can go ahead and move on to the next part. And so that's essentially how you provide input to it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, keep in mind that the 100, 3, and 5 that I'm using right here, these are just example numbers. Don't just put these numbers into your program and then just give me this one answer right here and think that that's good enough. The program does need to be able to handle any type of user input. Okay. Any other questions?
So before we submit the lab, can we show if we have any question, during that time, can we show you the work, and if there's something wrong with it, we can fix it? Or
yeah, if you want to be able to show me what you're where you're at with it, and if you have any questions about it, you can certainly do that.
and then just send it to your email.
Send what to my email?
So like if I have any question while I'm working on it, and like not during the class time, but during the week, do I just send it to you just in case I have any question? Or
yeah, so if it's outside of the lab time, then you could just send it to me through email. That's fine. Okay. Any more questions? Alrighty. Okay, so to give you guys a quick demo of what this should look like once you've got it working. So right now I've got it running. So it's kind of just sitting here waiting for me to give it the first input. So it's saying, please specify the initial balance. So I can go ahead and type in something here. Let's say for this first run through of it, I'll just go ahead and use the same numbers just to demonstrate that the math is still consistent, still works the way it's supposed to. So we'll just do that 100, push enter. And then it's going to go ahead and move to the next one and say, please specify the interest rate. So then put in 3. So when I push enter now, it's going to go ahead and take that, divide it by 100, and store that in that second variable. And then it'll say, please specify the number of elapsed years. So then put 5, push enter again. And then finally, it'll say that the final amount with interest is that roughly $115.93. So then at this point, it'll go ahead and finish. So the run button's available again. So if I go ahead and run this a second time, we can go ahead and put in slightly different numbers with it. So if I were to try something else, let's say instead, let's say maybe my initial balance is slightly larger. So maybe I start with something like $1,000. Let's say that the interest rate is maybe still about that 3%. Maybe try something more, something more exact, like you'd see in an actual bank. So do like 3.6%. And then let's say for the number of elapsed years, we're aiming for something a bit more long-term. So maybe we'll do something like 25 years instead. And then we can actually see that the amount has gone up a fair bit more than what it was before. We've more than doubled the amount of money there now. So then we see that the final amount with interest is about $2,420 and roughly 99 cents. So you can see that whenever you give it different inputs, you should expect a different output, since all the math is going to be a little bit different each time. Okay. So now that you guys have actually had a chance to see what the program should look like once you're running it, does anybody have any additional questions that they want to ask me about it? Okay, so if there's no questions right now, just go ahead and pause the recording here.